is Luke Allison from CriticalBench.com, and I'm here with Matt McGorry. Matt, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing all right. Take
Great.
just a second and introduce yourself. Give the Critical Bench listeners an idea about your athletic background.
Okay, sure. Well, I guess starting way back from the beginning, I didn't have actually much of an athletic background. I was always never quite too good at sports. I originally started training with weights when I was about 14 years old because we had to do push-ups for gym class, and I couldn't do one. So I ended up actually working with a trainer at that point, and that kind of got me into it. And from there, I think the natural progression was, once I found out that I enjoyed lifting weights, to kind of compete in that. So I've been competing in powerlifting for the last couple of years. I do raw powerlifting, mainly in the USAPL. And, I compete generally in 198, 181 class.
Now, one question I like to ask a lot of people, specifically powerlifters, is why powerlifting? It's a little bit off the beaten track.
Right. Well, so I started back when I was 14, lifting weights originally. I found that I didn't really have a whole lot of athletic potential in general. Found one thing that I could do fairly easily was actually put on weight, whether it was muscle or fat, the combination of both. And I particularly enjoyed I just enjoyed the one-man sport of lifting weights. Essentially, you took all the blame if you didn't do well, and you took responsibility if you did. And I really enjoyed the fact that essentially you could pile up information, study everything you could, and directly apply it and see those results improve. And I think that kind of crossed over to every other aspect of my life after I began in powerlifting. So I think it was a natural progression of finding out that I enjoyed lifting weights, and I initially started with more of a bodybuilding approach. Got myself quite a bit bigger than I am now, actually, by 20 pounds. And then I was actually in Boston studying in school, and I ended up meeting up with Eric Cressy, who's a powerlifter. He's also a great writer and strength coach. And at the time, I was about 220, and he was about probably 185. And I went out there, and I started training with him, and I was just getting destroyed by him in the gym. And I figured I wanted to do more than just kind of look stronger than I was. I actually kind of wanted to be as strong as I was, or as I looked, or more so. And that was it. And I kind of got on there from there.
That's a good start. I think you're going to make at least a couple people jealous by
Thank you, sir.
Doing that. Sure. Now, why raw powerlifting? You're probably, I guess, in a bit of a minority. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, the raw powerlifting for me, I guess initially when I started training with Eric Cressy up in Boston, I wasn't really strong enough to kind of warrant the gear to begin with. And now most times I'm training by myself. So to really kind of, from what I understand, to learn the gear on your own and how to kind of use the equipment to the best of your advantage requires some definite hands-on instruction. And my schedule, unfortunately, doesn't really allow me right now to make a trip to any powerlifting gyms. It's funny, actually, in New York City, Manhattan specifically, there's really not many powerlifting gyms. It's more of a bodybuilding culture in the urban area. So it was more of a lack of instruction, as combined with the fact that essentially I like to take all credit or blame for my lifts, and I felt like I feel like I have a lot of room to improve before I really need to add in another variable. So it's not something I'm completely ruling out in the future, but a couple of years down the line, if I feel like I'm starting to really kind of slow down, maybe 5 years, 10 years down the line, or if injuries are starting to kind of pile up, I think it's another thing to add in that can really kind of extend the career, And I feel like using that too soon, I don't want to tap out what I've got, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. It seems as if raw powerlifting might be a good option for some of our listeners if, for example, they're in an area, maybe like New York or somewhere like that they don't have access to, a group that is working in gear. People sometimes get confused that they're either powerlifting in gear or they're doing something else. So I think that's a good alternative because I don't think everyone wants to move. That's probably
right.
a little bit extreme to at least for the way powerlifting is right now.
Sure. I think it's great if you can train with a group of partners. Even when I was in Boston training with a group of guys, even once a week, did kind of huge things for me. It's just knowing that you're going back there and knowing that you're training with a group of guys stronger than you, and you don't want to be left behind in the bunch, And I think that carries over into all your other training sessions. So it's not always even just being there for that individual session, and also getting the feedback in terms of how to peak for a meet and all the other small stuff that kind of adds up and makes you stronger.
What does it mean to have a training log at Elite Fitness Systems?
It means a huge amount to me. Actually, it's been a pretty big year for me. I graduated from college last year. And it's funny, actually, I had initially this kind of strange fear of writing, and I'm not sure. My mother's an English teacher, so I've always she's always given me a lot of instruction, and I don't know what the fear. I had this weird fear, kind of aversion to writing. Even in college, actually, I'll be quite honest, I proofread probably about 10 papers. I didn't like reading my own writing so much. But this year, actually, I started, I just put myself out there. I started doing some writing I wrote for a buddy of mine, Nate Green. He's a writer for T-Nation, and I wrote an article for his website, and then it kind of snowballed from there. I ended up having a few articles on T-Nation, and I've talked to Jim Wendler and Dave Tate quite a bit over the years, going to different seminars, and I just presented this option to them. And actually, I talked to Dave when I was out in Ohio for reviewing actually the Arnold Expo, and I kind of pitched him my idea, and he seemed to like it. He said he'd go over the stuff, and it's a pretty awesome thing for me because I've looked up to these guys for a long time, and I really appreciate them giving me the chance to put my stuff on there, and especially being, I think, a very different kind of I go under the name The Unlikely Powerlifter, and I think that's the way I presented myself, as someone who's pretty different from most of the athletes that they sponsor. Most of the guys are kind of multi-ply, a lot of big guys, and guys who are used to training in powerlifting in crews, or as essentially I find myself to be, I think, kind of the newer generation of powerlifters, the YouTube powerlifter almost, where they're getting a lot of information from different training websites like, your website, Critical Bench, or Elite Fitness, or T-Nation, and kind of compiling that and talking to various people online and getting ideas, as opposed to, 10 years ago, people weren't able to do this, and I feel like it's kind of expanding that way. So, it means a huge deal to me, and I'm really proud to be representing them.
Now, you mentioned sort of being starstruck. How do you sort of reconcile that feeling with the idea that you can write and you do, sort of have something to contribute? How does that work?
Yeah, it's, I got to say, initially it was, I first met Dave Tate and Jim Wendler at the Syracuse Strength Symposium. I think that was my sophomore year of college, about 4 years ago, and I really was starstruck. I remember stuttering when I went to speak to Dave Tate, and I don't think I even bothered speaking to Jim Wendler. This was back in his bloated phase when he was 275, and I think I was just too scared to get anywhere near him. But and over time, and it happened a lot with the guys from T-Nation as well. And then over time, you realize, they're just good people. Most of these people are really good people, and kind of that's why they communicate. Not only the fact that they're, awesome athletes, awesome coaches, but they're generally good people. So they all hang out together and, do a lot of networking together. And over time, it kind of came together for me. And that's an interesting thing too, because when I was thinking about applying for the sponsorship initially, I thought, I'm not really strong enough to kind of warrant this, But then I started thinking of perhaps the positives, the fact that I'm building myself up there. A lot of these guys are very established, these guys are stronger than most of the world already, whereas I still have some place to go and also some things to learn. And therefore perhaps the readers can learn as I'm learning. There's mistakes that I make. And yeah, I felt that in terms of the writing stuff, people generally came to me for questions, whether it was about, training my clients, the writing that I'm doing for some different print magazines as well. I've done some stuff for Men's Fitness recently, Life and Style magazine. Got something coming out in Men's Health soon. But I found that I was just kind of taking the risks that I didn't really want to take. I thought something that would make me uncomfortable, like, for example, trying to talk to someone from a print magazine and sell myself to them. And I said, maybe I should just do this anyway, regardless. And it's kind of been working out, So sometimes it's worth it just to see those risks and realize that perhaps you do have more value than you initially see, and just go forward with it and see what other people think. Let other people be the judge rather than kind of judging yourself, if that makes any sense.
Sure. And on a personal note, I'll tell people to go look at your log just because, at least for the average person, it's probably a little bit easier to relate to some of your numbers than it is, Krajewski or Brian Schwab or some of the other guys that have, told their top numbers in their weight class and things like that. So do that. It's not quite as intimidating.
Right.
I know you're preparing for a meet right now. Sort of talk a little bit about where you are now and how far out you started.
Okay. Well, right now I'm about 3 weeks out as of yesterday. The meet's in Virginia. It's USAPL Raw Nationals. It's my first ever national meet, which is a pretty cool thing for me. In the past, I've just done the local meets, and a lot of times, that's fun, but generally I'm just going there for PRs, because it's really a matter of who shows up. So your personal record is the best thing I think you can get. So, in a national level meet, either you get really good guys that show up and you get absolutely crushed a lot of times, or you get like a mediocre crowd and you end up winning. And it's a funny thing with me. I'd either rather go head-to-head or completely get crushed and still kind of maybe come out, at like fourth or fifth, than I would kind of just dominate the competition. Just because I don't feel at this moment that, I'm pretty far from my ultimate potential, I think, and I'd still like that challenge. So this is going to be definitely a real challenge for me. My last meet I did, this will have been 5 months since the last meet, which is a little longer than I like to do. I think usually 12 to 16 weeks is a good cycle for me. So at this point, I've been using Jim Wendler's 531 program, which you guys may have heard about. It's been getting a lot of testimonials from various lifters online, and people have had a lot of success with it. And so, let's see. 2 weeks ago, I had a deload, and then last week I worked up to some kind of estimated openers. So worked up to 525 in the deadlift for a single, which was an estimated 90% of 585. Worked at 285 in the bench, which is an estimated 95% of 300, and a couple singles at 405 in the squat, which is an estimated 90% of 450. So from there, I'm basically judging essentially the speed of the lift, how clean the technique is. In this training cycle, I actually haven't really lifted anything less than I could do for probably 8 reps on my main lifts. I've still gotten stronger, and I'm also regaining weight from back when I was 181 in February, the end of February. But so yeah, there's some different technical issues that you just you tend to forget about, or they kind of fall by the wayside, or they have the tendency to when you're used to working with relatively lighter weights. For example, in the deadlift, my hips shot up pretty fast. I ended up kind of stiff-legging the weight because I wasn't used to kind of having to really think about keeping that torso stiff the way I do with heavier weights. With a lighter weight, it's easier to kind of just take the breath and go from there. So yeah, and I judge my generally my attempts on how fast those look, and also comparing them back to previous videos of it. On my YouTube account, I've got videos from the last few years, so I can generally see what I do in what I call my skills evaluation, and how fast those lifts look, and then how much that carries over to in the meet, how much weight I have left in me. And I feel like that's been a huge thing with the videotaping too, is it's just really allowed me to kind of judge essentially how much left I have in the tank, and any kind of technical errors as well, obviously. Next week, I'm actually trying something a little bit different. I'm essentially I'm working up to some heavier lifts. I've been talking to powerlifting coach Matt McGorry. He's a great coach. He coaches at a very high level in the USAPL and the IPF, and he's kind of helped me put together this peaking cycle. And I feel like that's something that's always evolving. I feel like even the guys who are competing for 10, 20 years are always talking about finding new and better ways to taper for competitions. So yeah, I'm thinking next week probably working up to some more 90%, 95% in the bench. The bench felt really easy this cycle. I think for the first time in my life, it's actually making some progress. The deadlift feels pretty good. I probably work up to some more 90%, maybe 95%. And the squat, I think I'm going to go a little higher too. And then from there, I'll really start backing off, working on singles in the deadlift, just working for the speed. The last week will be basically completely off on deadlift, more so on squat too, and with maybe a little bit of benching, a little bit of assistance work. Yeah, and that's kind of it. And next time I'll kind of see how it works and take it from there, yeah.
Okay. That's a lot of stuff and very, very sort of detailed. Has there been something specific that you were focusing on from, say, the last meet in preparation for this meet?
Let's see. I guess really one thing. Basically, I did for about 16 months previous to my meet at the end of February. I was using Sheiko, which is the Russian powerlifting system. It's kind of higher volume approach, which I found very effective at building strength, but especially so without actually increasing muscle mass. So for someone who's at the top of their weight class, I found it very, very effective. And for the February meet, February 28th, I had dieted down from 200 to 181, and this was with a 2-hour weigh-in, so it was pretty much a true 181, maybe 184, 185. I dieted some muscle off for sure. I was pretty lean, but I realized after that I didn't have a whole lot of muscle on me, or as much as I probably could. I was working with Shelby Starnes. I've been working with him for about 30 weeks now. He's another contributor to Elite Fitness, great nutritionist, also a bodybuilder in his own right. And I essentially decided, once I came down to 181, I thought to myself, wow, if I could add on, theoretically over time, 20 pounds of muscle or 15 pounds of muscle, it will do that much more for my lifts. So funny enough, this time around, I was actually really working on essentially staying a bit leaner and also putting on just a higher percentage of muscle to fat. Because essentially, no, we're not bodybuilders in powerlifting, but essentially, the more muscle you have and the leaner you are, the better you're going to be for your weight class. And that's why a lot of times I think you might see bodybuilders in the gym, at least in the early stages of their training, maybe outlifting some powerlifters, essentially because if a powerlifter is carrying extra 20 pounds of fat or 15 pounds of fat and the bodybuilder is pretty lean, then relatively he's going to be, in the lower weight class and somewhat stronger. So I've actually been concentrating somewhat on building muscle this time around, a lot on the nutrition. It's been about 30 weeks now, and it's funny. When I first started, I didn't think I'd be able to adapt, but I'm doing a lot of my own cooking, basically all my own meals, 6 or 7 meals a day I'm cooking, bringing all around Tupperware with me. Sounds like I'm more of a bodybuilder now than a powerlifter in a weird sense, but it's been working pretty well. So yeah.
Okay. Well, it sounds like a sort of long-reaching goal that has some sort of implications into a lot of different areas.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think going back to the Sheiko approach, like I said, I did find it worked very well for me, but wasn't that effective at putting on muscle. I think once I go back to that, you're really setting yourself up for more gains. Essentially, the more muscle you have, the more potential for strength you have as well. Up to a certain limit, obviously. Yeah.
Right. Now, previously you talked about sort of videotaping lifts. Do you have criteria that you use in terms of watching for bar speed or sort of how you'll archive things or sort of anything like that people could sort of take away?
Let's see. I guess I have a few different aspects of it. It used to be, I guess, before I got my iMac, I had no editing software, so it used to be single sets done, where you'd see me walk up to the camera and walk away from the camera. And then I started, first of all, I enjoyed posting them. I enjoyed posting them and putting the music to them, as long as YouTube doesn't, take the music off nowadays, which is starting to happen more and more. And initially, I think it was more about when I felt that I gave an effort that was really pretty substantial, that I'd like to post it, whether or not it was actually, whether I viewed it to be a great lift or not, if it was strong enough, or if it was a hard enough battle that it was worth posting, or like I have this floor press video from a couple of years ago. I was doing 295 or something, and it's actually pretty funny. I got with my legs straight, I got enough leg drive that my butt was about 6 inches off the ground with straight legs on a leg press. Not the most ideal thing, but I did find that it was funny enough to post. And I think Jim Wendler commented me on it. He said, complimented me on it, saying that it was a good effort. And it's kind of like crapping your pants on deadlifting. You don't really want to tell anyone about it, but it still makes you know that you worked your hardest on it. And yeah, now I'm posting definitely all the skills evaluations where I'm working up to heavier weights. And now that I'm starting to get a little bit of a following on there, I'm just trying to kind of keep the people entertained while also not kind of oversaturating. So I think taping every session is a little much. People get tired of it when you see your subscription updates. Sometimes you're just like, I'll watch the next one. But yeah, I think there's a certain, as we'll probably get into later, I'm also an actor, so there's a certain probably performance aspect of it as well, just in terms of finding the camera angles and, pairing the music to it and, whatever else. But yeah, I think it can be very useful just in terms of, first of all, form feedback. If you're not training with a crew, which I'm not, it's important to be able to send these to someone. So whether it's you're sending it to guys on the Q&A and Elite Fitness, who can give you feedback on it, or other powerlifting coaches, I think it's like probably the most useful tool in our modern day training arsenal. Not to mention the kind of essentially moral support. If you're training at a gym that's got no powerlifters, you get, it feels a little lonely. No one really gives a crap if you've gotten, new PR in the gym. But if you post online, and some of these people have forums where they post their videos, which is what I was doing essentially, then you get feedback and you get people, who are encouraging you, and essentially, you go into competition with the other guys. So it's an interesting kind of internet essentially training group where you can get the feedback and you can get that kind of sense of competition. So even if you are training by yourself, you can think, hey, someone's going to appreciate this other than me, and I think that really helped you stick to it. And that's essentially why a lot of people hire personal trainers, is for that accountability, and to be able to have someone else see what you're doing and give you feedback on there.
Sure. That support is, it doesn't matter how you get it, but it is that constant that needs to be there in some shape.
Absolutely.
How important are deloads to you?
Deloads are, to me, I think, supremely important. I've never really understood. And some lifters are very old school. They don't take any time off. Personally, I don't see how that can be done. Maybe I'm missing out on something. Maybe there's some kind of genetic component too. I hate to use that card, but I think the deloads are supremely important. As we know, fatigue masks fitness. So the more tired you are, and essentially to get stronger, you have to impose a certain amount of fatigue on your body. Then you'll see kind of essentially a performance decrease. As you increase the fatigue, you'll see the decrease in the performance. that's temporarily if you're doing it in the right way. And the deload essentially allows you to rest your body and actually come back stronger and eliminate some of that fatigue, while also kind of giving your body a rest, giving the joints a rest. So I think I think there's no way to do without it, unless, someone's competing enough that they're frequently tapering down and peaking, which is essentially an extended deload, where you're trying to get rid of essentially all that fatigue. So unless they're doing that, I think the deloads are incredibly important. Right now I'm doing more of a, every fourth week I'm deloading, which is what I did kind of when I got started in powerlifting. Eric Cressy got me into that. He was very much about fluctuating the training stress. We would often start week 1 would be like a high stress, week 2 would be a medium, week 3 would be super high, and week 4 would be a deload. And that way you're kind of getting that super compensation effect. And we would do that basically by changing the volume as well as the intensities of the lifts. But by the same token, I also, when I did Sheiko, I would go a while without a deload. I'd go 8 weeks without a deload, 12 weeks. But then again, that program, for me at least, I found that it really took a toll on me. It was tiring. I felt a lot of times tired, generally most of the time. But then, once you got rid of that fatigue, it worked. The lifts would just shoot on up. So
I think it's sort of becoming, I guess, in vogue now to be much more sort of aware of, the deload and the programming and, sort of overuse injuries and all of that. And,
absolutely.
It's definitely something people can look at and make their own evaluations, but, being told it's out there, so that's good at least.
Sure, yeah.
Talk a little bit about sort of what you do maybe differently to manage training where you do sort of by yourself in a commercial environment. What do you do when people are staring at you or they're sitting on machines that you're usually using? Go into that for a minute.
Okay. It's funny, I haven't had much of an issue with that. First of all, the staring, I don't really mind. I don't really care unless it's aggressive, which actually, and sometimes it has been. If someone's just staring because they're watching, that's fine by me. I've done it before to strong guys too, and I think, when I see it and it's inspired, if I'm inspired or if I've been inspired by someone, and if I could hopefully maybe do that for, a couple people through my YouTube channel or, even in the gym, then that's great, And I think a lot of the thing with powerlifters is people stereotype them as being big, mean bastards, and I think a lot of times that's not the case, We're just focused on what we're doing, so we don't have a smile on our face and we're not, talking to every single person by the water cooler. And generally I find, if people are in the racks, people are curling in the squat racks, I just say, hey, do you mind if I work in with you when I'm squatting? Most times they'll say, no, I don't mind. And then once they see you start putting the plates on the bar, they're kind of like, I should probably get the hell out of here. And they kind of pack up their stuff and go move to the preacher curl bench or, the curl machine or something else. And I feel like generally being kind of nice about it it works, The only problem I've really had is essentially with the deadlift. I find it very difficult for me to really, when I'm doing a lot of reps, to control my eccentric or lowering phase of the deadlift. I find that it really just fatigues my back, and that if I do that as the session goes on, my low back flexion gets worse and worse, setting me up for more injury. So I found one gym that's a couple blocks away from me that actually doesn't bother me quite as much about it. They were bothering me for a while about not having any shoes on. I talked to the owner who used to be a powerlifter himself, and I find being the best thing is being essentially apologetic, but also this is what I need to do. Saying, hey, look, man, I understand, you don't want me to break my toes, but is there any way I can do this? I really need to do it for my sport. I'm training for competition. If people don't think you're just being a jerk by slamming a weight down over and over again, making a lot of noise for no reason, if they understand that it's actually, for competition, I think they give you a little more leeway. So essentially I drew up my own waiver, and it says that if I crush my foot, that I'm not going to blame the gym. I signed it. I gave it to them, and that worked out pretty fine. They've also been giving me a little bit of some issues about chalk. it's funny, that the deadlifting in New York, most of the gyms are, high up in buildings, so the people below, downstairs, it makes, it really disturbs them, which is, I wish it wasn't the case, but it's kind of understandable. This other gym that I train at is in the basement, so it's not a big of an issue. But, so they're giving me crap a little while for the chalk. My favorite one for that is I tell people that if I don't use chalk, that my calluses tear off, and then I start bleeding everywhere, and I start bleeding on the bar and the floor. And I tell them, look, I'm sorry, I really don't want to bleed all over your gym, so I kind of have to use this chalk in order to keep my hands dry enough that my calluses won't tear off. And usually that tends to work. I'm not sure if it works at every gym, but I think it's a pretty good excuse. And the same thing when it comes to putting the deadlifts down loudly. I tell them, the deadlift is just kind of explaining it to them. The deadlift is, it starts with a concentric. It starts with a lifting. There's no stretch reflex on the lowering portion. So essentially you're putting all the load on your back if you're really doing it slowly. And I really don't want to injure myself in your gym, I think the last thing I want is to herniate a disc in the gym with bloody hands bleeding all over the bar, something like that. Essentially just creating this vile image in their mind. Sort of joking about that, but I hope you get it.
And certainly with, sort of asking for those concessions, you're hopefully doing what they would want, which is limiting liability in terms of, not dropping heavy weight, not causing other problems, not sending the bar through the floor, things like that. So
exactly.
That's good. I have a sort of similar problem right now where I'm deadlifting at a commercial gym, and they've decided that the white above the squat rack and the power rack, they're just going to leave it burned out. And it's been, out for about 5 weeks, and, I train at night. So it's great. Move a couple 100 pounds in the dark. I can't possibly see anything going wrong with this.
Maybe we should just bring a lantern and set up shop right there.
I might have to. That would be great. I'll put that up on YouTube.
That would be wonderful.
I appreciate your approach, because I think that there's a movement to get out of those type of gyms, the commercial gyms, the global type of stuff. But for everybody, it's simply not possible to, for work or for convenience or commute or whatever, that they might have to sort of make these arrangements, sort of like you have.
Sure, yeah. And I mean, I was surprised that they even bothered me at all, to be honest, at the other gym that I lived at, because it's essentially a bodybuilding gym, not a hardcore bodybuilding gym per se, but I've seen Victor Martinez there, and a couple other pro bodybuilders, and you think they wouldn't mind, but I think really making that distinction, letting them know that you're not doing it just to be loud, and that you're actually training for a competition, and this is the way it kind of needs to be done. And I think generally people will make a little more allowances, especially if you let them know that you're only doing it for a few minutes. With the Sheiko, it was tough because over the course of 2.5 hours, I'd be deadlifting, and I think people were going out of their minds. But people would come and go during that entire 2.5-hour training session.
Yeah, that's possibly a week's workout for some people. So you got to be careful. I talk a little bit about sort of how you find balance with your other pursuits. You have a lot of other stuff going on. Go into that for a second.
Okay. I wish I had some secrets for that. I feel like a lot of it is just essentially when you find a couple things that you're really passionate about, and you're willing to make those sacrifices, that it ends up falling into place. For me, a typical day right now looks like essentially I'll get up. I don't train morning clients, which is nice. I've kind of eliminated that also because I like to go to bed pretty late and I can't seem to really fall asleep very early. So I'll train, I'll wake up 8 or 9, start training clients at 11, probably train like 3 clients, and I have, maybe train myself in between 3 more clients, and then essentially go straight to rehearsal. I'm doing a theater show right now. I'm also an actor, so I got my degree from in college. And I'll go to rehearsal for, from say 3 to 6, and then 6:30 I have call for the show, and then 8 o'clock I have the show, and I get out at 9 and end up hanging out for an hour or two, and then head back uptown. So I mean, I find if you really want to do these things, if you really have these things that you want to do, you'll make the sacrifice. Perhaps if I was a full-time powerlifter and that was truly my only interest, maybe I would make the commute. Maybe I would travel an hour or an hour and a half both ways to try to get to a gym where I can get some kind of more hands-on feedback. But I feel like it's not absolutely essential. And I also have these other interests that are really important to me. So I'm doing the acting thing as well as I'm also pursuing some comedy stuff. Some people may have seen my comedic YouTube videos, most notably the contrast shower one, which some people seem to enjoy, and the writing as well. Yeah, it's funny. I think to a degree my social life has become somewhat limited, although I don't think unreasonably so. I think depending on the demographic you're comparing it to, for someone who just kind of graduated college a year ago, I'm not going out every night during the week. It tends to be pretty limited to the weekend nowadays, and I essentially go crazy if I'm not busy. I've had to cut back a little bit on training clients right now because of the show that I'm in. So when the show is over at the end of July, I'll be picking up a lot more clients again. Some of my old clients who I had to kind of put on hold temporarily or train a bit more infrequently, and probably picking back up more in the writing as well. But yeah, essentially, you see the things you want to do and you make the sacrifices to some degree. I'd be lying if I said, I didn't make any sacrifices. I feel like there are some times when I've sacrificed doing fun things, being in certain minor relationships, simply because there's only so much you can do at once, when it comes to essentially being very regimented about this. And some people can get away with it. I find, though, that if I really want to do the best that I can, and powerlifting included, then I need to be making all my meals. I need to be carrying them all with me, cooking a couple times a week, and making sure I'm getting enough sleep, because otherwise it really burns me out. So I'm forced to be essentially a little more selective with how I'm spending my free time these days. And I think that's true with anyone who's trying to do a lot of great things. And I learned that when I was up in Boston training with Eric Cressy, and I saw him. The guy worked his butt off, and I never saw the guy drink an ounce of alcohol. Can't say I claim the same thing, but never saw the guy drink an ounce of alcohol. Was always either studying or training other people. And, he's doing great things. He's doing a lot of great things for himself. So I think essentially you really find what you want to do, try to get good enough at it that you're not, at least in terms of the personal training, try to get good enough at it that you don't have to do it, 10, 12 clients a day. I just can't ever see myself wanting to do that. I think that it would burn me out. I much prefer being spread over a couple different areas, whether it includes my own powerlifting training, my comedy stuff, my acting stuff. I feel like I need to be spread in a couple different areas, and it keeps me a lot more fresh in each of those different areas. And other than that, just being hungry, reading all you can, trying to learn all you can, seek out the best people. That's really how you learn, save a ton of time, just by hanging out with a lot of these, smart guys. You find out what books are worth reading, so you're not wasting time reading the bad stuff, what things work and kind of in the field and what are just, essentially written about, but no one's ever practiced them before. And you kind of pick up on all these things, and just having that good network of people to bounce stuff off of becomes incredibly useful. Going on a little bit of a rant here. Sorry about that.
No, that's good. I think a lot of people get, sort of confused about how they can, break up their time and do time management things and prioritize, and they don't have a lot of examples to go to. So I thought your case was, sort of, worthy of at least getting time to. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Beginning to run out of time here, but if people are interested in getting in touch with you, if you have a website, tell them how they can do that.
Sure. My personal website is Matt McG, that's MattMcG training, at gmail.com. .com. So it's mattmcgtraining.com. And the best email to reach me at these days would be Matt McGorry. That's MattMcGorry, Matt McGorry at gmail.com. You can also check out my training log on Elite FTS under the Unlikely Powerlifter.
That about does it. But, Matt, I want to thank you for the time. Definitely
Great.
appreciate it, and your willingness to be so open.
Great. Thanks very much. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Take care.
Thanks.